So today we're going to be talking about tools. And as part of our little theme of the data disruption tour, if you will, or data disruptor tour, where we're doing all these really cool album covers, our esteemed colleague, Matt Hebb, did some really cool cover art that you can see there that reminds us of a band called Tool. And I think what did we say this album came out, the original album cover?
96.
86? 96, sorry, 96.
And I actually had to go find my CDs as I'm packing recently, and like, hey, look,
Nice.
it's the actual album we're going to cover here.
Very nice. Very nice. Yeah, it's really cool artwork there, and it's got the Tintry logos and whatever. So he always does an amazing job with that stuff. So we've covered some of these tools in previous sessions, but what we thought we would do is take them all and kind of show them all in one. So we're not going to spend as much time on each, but I thought it might be interesting to go in and see, okay, what are all the different things that this thing can do or this product can do from a tool perspective, all the ancillary stuff on the outsides. And show it all in one place in one time. So a couple of housekeeping items. So feel free to ask questions in the chat. I do monitor the chat, and so does our Mr. Producer, otherwise known as Matt Olson. We do watch the chat, so we do try to answer questions as we go along if we can. Second of all, as you're probably already aware, there is a giveaway that we do for the live attendees of this session, and that giveaway is one of these. So we have a branded Nintendo Switch, which are really awesome. And Nintendo's been in the news recently. So the Switch is still going to be a very viable product for years to come, which I'm very excited about. So if you're interested in one of those, obviously you're already entered. But if you keep coming, you'll keep getting chances to win. So we'll draw that. So watch your email after the session's over. Watch your spam folder, because if we reach out to you and you don't get back to us, you may get bypassed. So we'll see. So anyhow. So with that, let me introduce a frequent guest on the Geek Out series, Mr. Shawn Meyers. Shawn, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Shawn Meyers. I'm a field CTO here. I work in multiple areas, basically tech marketing, and the office of the CTO, product management, and such.
Perfect. So we've got a pretty packed agenda today. So we're going to be going into a whole bunch of these tool sets, if you will. So Shawn, why don't we kick it off and show everybody what we're going to talk about?
All right. So agenda-wise, we're just going to cover, so we're going to do some more in depth on the top 4 tools, and then we're going to kind of just very skim over a bunch of the other integration points we have. Do I have this timing thing going on in my deck again?
I think you might.
Moving forward without me telling it to go forward. I've had
it's the gremlins. They're the PowerPoint gremlins.
Well, it's one of those timing. One of our templates I think we might have used for this actually has a auto forward after 30 seconds, and I didn't go check and see if I turned that one off when I wrote this deck. But we'll see. All right, so agenda-wise, we're going to cover vRCP, which of course is the remote VMware client plugin, VAAI, or the Tintry VAAI, which we'll cover what that is in a few minutes if you're not familiar. Our SyncVM process, the SRA/SRM plugin for those who want to use it, and then go into all the other tools just so you are aware they exist, and you may want to go learn more later on from our support site. So, Tintry tool, RVCP, stands for Remote VMware Client Plugin. We used to call it just the VCP, the VMware Client Plugin, but after vSphere 7?
8.
Yeah, see, it's rolling forward again. So yeah, we've got a PowerPoint gremlin in here. It's auto-forwarding my decks, deck slides, every 30 seconds. So I'll have to, back and update things. We're not going to fix it in the middle of it, though.
So it was required in 8, correct?
Yeah. And so basically what happened was VMware had all kinds of security holes when they discovered that when you're installing things on vCenter, that you could basically have a plugin that did all kinds of silly things. And then, so they went, oh, we need to go close those holes. And one of the things they did basically was you no longer install, the things on vCenter, you actually install them on a different server. And now you use the API to call things back and forth. So for us at Tintry, our VMware client plugin became a remote VMware client plugin, and it's now a container. So you go run it inside of a Docker system or Kubernetes kind of process. A couple things it does, it basically integrates tightly the VMstore operations into vCenter. So now a lot of things I can do from the VMware system, I can now do, inside, thing I do inside the VMstore, I now can do in vCenter. So actually, quick poll here: how many of you are using the vCenter or the VMware Client plugin today? Hey, Matt, look at that poll question up. All righty. So we'll banter about some of the history of this kind of stuff, but um, we're really excited about having this process because it makes life easy for those who want to do that. One of the main things for me, of course, is while I'm talking to the slides wise, is it allows a lot of the RBAC process. So if I have a customer or an admin who only manages certain VMs, they can only do those certain VM object management from a Tentry perspective inside of vCenter, and so they can no longer manage other VMs, kind of things.
Because there's specific permissions that we add in, correct?
Correct.
That can control that access to those functions.
We're actually leaning on the VMware RBAC processes for a lot of that
Right.
stuff too. So that way, if I lock down an admin who wants to control of, let's say, the marketing VMs or the accounting VMs, and we don't want them access to other things, I can do all that control inside of VMware. And versus instead of us having to rebuild an RBAC system inside of in the VMstore, we utilize that for this process. All right, let's see the results. What we have.
Yeah. What do we got? Curious to see how many never heard of it. Let's see what we got.
Tabulating.
Do 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 do. Well, at least Zoom didn't have a complete outage like they did the other day. So
Yeah.
I suppose that's a good thing that we're all here. Maybe the poll stuff is still lagging behind. We'll see.
There's an issue. I'll work on that.
Okay. So we'll continue on with stuff. But I was kind of walking through some of the points here. Some of the main tasks you can accomplish basically via the RVCP is going to be protect, meaning set snapshots and schedules. I can take my manual snapshots there. I can do cloning of virtual machines. I can recover from snapshots, which is a little bit different from cloning kind of stuff. I can view basically a lot of the VMstore observability data inside of vCenter now instead of having to log into it. Because one of the fun things because of this tool, I've been on calls on like support type call with a customer or a sales kind of thing, and they haven't logged into TGC Tentry Global Center in over a year because they do all their tasks from the RVCP. So they're like, "What's the IP address of that box? How do I get to it again?" And
Jeez.
I mean, the fact that the system runs, our storage system runs so well, you don't have to log in almost a year is always to me, a fantastic shout out about it just runs itself. And then we can configure, QoS processes, and I can do a lot of the troubleshooting things. So let's just go show you what that looks like. Live demo. All right. So VMware, we're all familiar with what vSphere looks like. Most of us are kind of processes. When I first log in, I've got in here, set up. Why can I click inside my box? Oh, the poll is up. That's why.
Yeah, the poll's up. So
Sorry, Shawn.
yeah, so 36% said never heard of it.
All right.
50% say know of it and I haven't used it yet. And then very small is installed and used occasionally and use it daily.
Yeah.
So
see, if you're in a VMware environment, you should be probably in the using it daily process, especially if you're a VMware admin kind of stuff. It makes your life much easier, and that's why we built this tool. So since 86% of you are going to learn something about this, and hopefully it'll pursue you to go in to be at least install it and possibly use it occasionally or use it daily.
yeah, I would agree. I use it daily, and I wasn't allowed to vote, but I find enough value in it where it's pretty rare that I don't use this function in a given day. So,
and I cannot click anywhere on my machine right now. I am confused.
is there
I had to
a
stop sharing and restart.
box open?
Something's not right, but yeah, I had to stop share for a second there.
And my ear is disappearing. That's kind of a strange look. Yeah, this whole green screen AI thing makes my ear go away. Strange look.
All right, so now we think I've got it back.
And now half your face is gone. Hey, you're back.
All right. That's pretty awesome.
Yes, there you go.
All right, so now
Lou says, like you need another hole in your head. Yeah, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to say about that.
Lou's a buddy. We all love Lou.
Yes, we love Lou. Yes.
So basically, again, shortcuts processes under Tintry. Let's just go walk through this process. I always just go click on here, and it's on the my context menu for Tintry. Bring in here. Basically, instance tells you which IP address is. You can install multiple copies of it. Which, if you happen to have multiple vCenters, you're going to have a copy per each one. Well, process. So getting started, basically, you should add your VM stores in your view. Add data stores, but typically speaking, manage wise, this is just the setup of it. Here is where I'm actually going to do my work. So basically here, for example, I'm going to go play with this VM store, look at it. These are basically screens from the VM store I am now seeing inside of vCenter. I can go test validate connection process, but go to more objects. I see all my VMs that are on this VM store that are managed by this vCenter, and I can go do things with them. I can go look at my snapshots in here too as well and see how many snapshots I have. So the cool thing is here, I'm on here, I'm going to go play with this Tingle 1. I can click on this. It's actually going to take me to that VM. But say I want to do a new snapshot. I'm on this Tingle VM, right click, there's a Tintry context box here. I now can do snapshot, view my snapshots, clone, protect, configure this, and synchronize. And Steve is going to cover synchronize later on. But I can do all these activities from here. So the protect process. So on here, I have an hourly snapshot process. I want to change that. I can do, instead of logging into TGC, I'm in the, I create a new VM. I need to go do different things. Instead of logging into TGC and go create a protection policy, I can now do all these tasks while I'm in here. So let's go add a daily snapshot process and click protect. So it's now gone ahead and updated it, done. Now my snapshot process, I'm going to go do that. Same thing, taking a snapshot. So all the activities from taking snapshots, viewing snapshots, cloning and such that I do from TGC, I can now do in vCenter and make my life easier kind of process. So let's go ahead and take our manual snapshot right now. Geek out test. And take a snapshot. So if I want to go back in here, Tintry and view snapshots, I can now see which snapshots I have in this process. And it'll take me back into this thing, and I can go actually see all my Tintry snapshots under this context menu. So I'm under basically the VM configure. There's a Tintry snapshots. I can go see all of them here. Kind of process. And then action.
So if somebody asks you, hey, are we protecting this particular VM?
Yep.
You don't necessarily even have to log into our tool to do it. You can get that answer very quickly, just straight from vSphere.
Yep. And once I highlight one, my action menu comes up, and I can go ahead and do a clone, delete, this kind of stuff. So I can do all these things right from this screen automatically. The other thing I like to look at, again, the observability data. So I go into summary-wise, I can see how many IOPS, these things. Again, I log in, I'm seeing my latency processes. I'm seeing all this information in here of overall what's going on with my VM store. I'm not seeing the per VM matrix and stuff, but I'm seeing the overall processes here. Lots of different things, whatever you're looking for kind of stuff. And sometimes this data is actually presented here differently. It might be easier for you to understand versus using the TGC or TXOS screens kind of stuff. But the fact that I'm seeing it right here inside of vCenter, and now I can basically do all my work in one tool instead of going back and forth, which is why I prefer to use this over anything else. Couple quick things about basically this process. This is actually the container I'm logging into for configuration wise. So when you go to set it up, you log into this. I just want to show you what it looks like. In the day is I register a new vCenter. I can go ahead and enter the information in here. Obviously username, password, and obviously the host name. And this is from this process. And from here is also where I'm going to do my troubleshooting on some of the things with it. There's some bizarre issues going on with it. So, but actually back here, I should have mentioned that under manage, I can go now support bundles and generate a bundle here. So if I ever need to do a support issue or troubleshoot problems kind of stuff. And I don't have all my vCenter, I have multiple vCenters and I have different VM stores hooked up to different ones. So, but here you can see I can have 20, 30, different VM stores in here, no problem. This one shows it's failed because I re-imaged it recently and I haven't added it back in yet, kind of process. But that covers, in a nutshell, vRCP. I think anybody who runs a VMware environment and has a Tintry box should definitely have this installed, operational, and learn how to use it, because it does make your life easier. Because I could still go in to TGC, VMstore, and do all these activities here from these VMs, kind of process and manage objects and do all the, what I was doing there. But it's just easier to do it if I'm already in one screen. Why log into a different application to go do the same tasks? Any questions or comments, Steve, about that?
So Lou made a comment. He said, "Where has this been my whole life?" And my answer has been, well, at least for the last 11 years of your life, this has been here in various forms. But this particular remote plugin has been here for about 2 years now, something like that. So,
Let's go find out.
but we had
So-
the previous version, which, as you mentioned, was installed straight on vCenter. We've had that for quite some time. So,
Yeah. So for those who are all the tools we're going to talk about in the show, and you're like, where do I get them from? Let's go ahead and walk through that now, actually. So when you log into the support portal under downloads, this is where you're going to get your new copies of software. So when we release a new version of TXOS, TOX 5.6, for example, is right here, and all the information about it. And I go do my downloads. So scroll down. So container service interface, we'll cover all these later on. But for example, the VAAI plugin, which is the next one we're going to cover, and the client rewrite plugin. So you figured this one here was released in 2017, version 2. We called it web plugin back then, and we've updated the name. But the latest one, 1.3, was released in December. The biggest difference with this is our support for IPv6. And this, all different versions. And of course, we'll probably have a new one coming out as soon as vSphere 9 goes GA. Within a couple months, we'll have a version of that available for you too for this. We're already working on it. It's just, vSphere 9 is not released yet. But this is where you get it, you download it and install it kind of stuff. Make sure you download the release notes and review it, because again, it runs as a container. So you must have Docker on your server, and then you basically do the install process. The admin guide or release notes actually walk you through how to do the install, and it's pretty straightforward. I think the 1.0 version, we had a few typos in some of the commands, and it was not all that simple. And we've actually fixed all those issues and it was just typos, not anything wrong, technically speaking. Right, Steve? You remember those problems?
yes. And by the way, the documentation for all this stuff on our support portal under the downloads page, it's easy to miss. There's a little tab up at the top there. So that's where manuals are, and not release notes. Release notes are on the main page, but compatibility guides, all the stuff that goes along with that product, it's kind of hidden in that little tab there. So just keep that in mind. If you're ever looking for documentation, go to what you're looking for the documentation for in terms of the product, whether it be TXOS or TGC or whatever it might be. And then that documentation tab will have the vast majority of things that you'd be looking for. Like that, exactly.
Yes. All right, Matt, let's go ahead before I switch gears to the VAAI plugin. Let's go do a poll on that one.
Perfect.
Very exciting.
And Shawn, while I'm running that, I did send you an updated PowerPoint file in the chat that does an auto advance.
Oh, okay, cool. Then I
Thank
will
you.
switch off to that.
All right. So let's do the same kind of poll with VAAI that we did with VCP. So how many of you are using the VAAI plugin? Because it's an installable thing, you're probably using it daily, whether you like it or not, if you install it. So let's get a results of that poll here in a second, while he's changing slide decks. So VAAI is an installable product. You're going to go into this here in a minute. It's essentially a shim or an extension inside vSphere, ESXi in particular. And so it's different installing of that than it would be for installing, for example, a remote plugin, because it actually gets installed on the host. So again, vast majority of people have either never heard of it or know about it but haven't used it yet. And we have one person so far that's installed it. So this will be new for a lot of folks. So this is good. This is why we're doing this, because you may not be aware of a lot of these functions and features. So.
All right. So VAAI. This is again for VMware. This is another VMware type tool. Either I downloaded the wrong one or something's not right, because it's still auto forwarded for me, or I reopened the wrong one. But we'll figure that out later. So vStorage, so VAAI, what's it stand for? It's a VMware thing. It stands for vStorage APIs for Array Integration. That's a mouthful. What does it mean? Basically allows you to has a set of API from VMware to take things instead of having the ESXi host do it, to offload it to the storage array. So back in the day, especially when you did databases in the in VMware 4, for example, they were told you everything must be eager zero thick provisioned. And what that means is when I create a vdisk, I'm going to go write zeros on it. So I'm going to reallocate all the things on the storage array, and it would just write 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0 kind of stuff. And so I'm working with a big database. I go create a 2 terabyte data file or a vdisk for it. Right click, do that, and it took hours for that to create because you had to wait for it to write zeros for hours. When VAAI said, hey, let's go ahead and just offload this to the storage array. And so what happened most of the time, the storage array took that, went, oh, you want to write zeros to it. It went to the first block, wrote zeros, went to the last block, wrote zeros, said, in the background, I'm going to write more zeros, and then tell basically VMware I'm done. So now I can go create a 2 terabyte file full of zeros in about 10 seconds. Much better than waiting 2 or 3 hours to do that. And that was the whole point of VAAI, plus a bunch of other things. So in a day, if you go Google VMware VAAI, you'll see it's going to stuff. And they're basically supported primitives. Basic primitives basically is the smallest unit concept of a data manipulation process. Is that the terms I tend to use for this? So full file clone. So basically, when I'm doing cloning processes of a VM, especially right click and clone VM kind of things, instead of doing it all from, hey, let's copy the data from the storage and copy it to the host and then copy it back down there. Let's just go from storage block A to storage block B, offload at the storage level instead of having to copy it across the network through the host and then back to the same storage location. Reserve space kind of stuff, and then the fast file clones, which is definitely using with link clone processes. If you're running what used to be Horizon View, which when Broadcom sold it off and now became Omnissa, this is where you do your link clone processes, and that's where VAI is very, very important.
I would say if you're doing that without using VAAI, you're doing it wrong.
You're wasting time.
Yeah, you're wasting a lot of time.
The amount of
Let the array do the work.
Yes.
Yeah.
And especially on some of these task kind of processes, if I'm doing cloning, if I'm doing all kinds of things, or even storage vMotion processes, actually are much faster process with this. Some of the things we're talking like on storage vMotions, you can get probably 20 times faster performance, or numbers I saw in some of the old blog posts when we did things, and they actually have good demos showing why that makes a difference. Because when you're doing a storage vMotion kind of process, it doesn't. It basically moves the functional part of the VM and moves the rest of it later on. So in other words, I'm actually running on the new location, even though it's not all there, and those kind of things. So VAI is, again, it's a full array set of tools, of APIs that we can use, and we've written for these for you. So if you still need, that should be thick provisioning and not thin. And Matt, I had think before, and it should have been thick, and we fixed it from think to thin. Not and that's all my problem. So yes, and then improve stronger basically storage vMotion, and it does require NAS certification. Basically, VMware has the VMware compatibility guide, which is now the Broadcom compatibility guide, called the BCG. And with those of you who have ever been in the U.S. military, BCG means birth control glasses, because that's the things we gave us in the Army for us to go wear. All right, so got a question in chat. Says, does RVCP do the same optimization as VAAI, or they work together? They are two separate tools and they do different things. And so, yes, you must install the RVCP and you must install VAAI.
Yeah, VCP can call some things that leverage VAAI.
Yes.
But to your point, they're two different tools. So VCP is a container, or RVCP is a container, whereas VAAI is a shim or an extension that gets installed on ESXi. So they're kind of two different things.
Live demo. So there's not much to demo because I don't have one working and not working kind of stuff. So we're just going to go through and show you basically how to validate it's actually installed. And that's one of the biggest things. So one of the things, there's two different ways of installing it. One is the command line, which is my favorite, of course. And then, of course, there's Lifecycle Manager. I just go through Lifecycle Manager, which, of course, is always easy to get into. Basically, go into your baselines processes and your vendor add-ons, and you'll see in here, it's on the next page, of course. That is the last page. But basically, in here, so what it is, you use, vendor add-ons. Come on. I was going to baseline, but here, for example, I create a baseline for me for the Sentry VAI extension version 1.03 kind of stuff. And that way it is, I can just apply it, I have it multiple times for different versions. And I just apply it to all my hosts. And then basically next time I do lifecycle management, it'll go through and do that. One caveat right now, when I upgrade it, or if I basically install the first time, it does require the ESXi host to be rebooted. The good news is VMware has finally released a new toolkit, which we are coding with our next version, which allows me to upgrade VAAI without a reboot. The install will still require a reboot going forward, but the upgrades will not require reboots. At least, hopefully, depends on the nature of changes inside of VMware. But right now, of course, obviously, you have to install, then use the latest version, which we don't have out yet, kind of stuff to do that process. So you just want to make sure you're aware that does require, obviously, maintenance mode for your host.
So fortunately, if you're running a cluster that has enough reserve where you can take something out for maintenance, put it in maintenance mode, this ends up being non-disruptive because the workloads will just move around while you're doing these rolling reboots, right?
Yeah.
But that's standard procedure for almost anybody out there, right? So this is not a huge ask,
right?
Because patches required reboots anyway.
Yeah, so when you're already going through lifecycle management, you're patching the latest updates, and also because Broadcom is launching or releasing a lot of critical patches all the time these days, so you have to go do that. So quickest way: ESX CLI, software vib list, grep for VAI. Of course, when I typed it the first time, because I don't know why we have a typo, I'll have to have a typo, but we use lowercase for this, so we do grep. Obviously, for that, it's not going to find anything. It scared me. I'm like, what do you mean? I know this is installed, and then I looked up the the code and. Actually, I went through and just did Tintry, and then it went, oh, it's lowercase AAI, kind of stuff. Whoops. One of the other things to always look at, I just read multiple windows and stuff, is running here, basically storage list, kind of stuff here. It tells me all the things that are mounted and if it's available. So basically, hardware acceleration is supported. So basically, if you run the NFS storage list for some reason and you have other storage that doesn't support VAI, there's a hardware acceleration and will show not supported processes. Just one more thing to go look at.
So if we don't have VAAI installed, that shows not supported, correct?
No, it still shows support. It's basically showing the data store supports it. Doesn't mean it's installed. So that's why one is basically showing other things you've mounted. Will it support VAI? And if the answer is no, and of course every Tintry VMstore should show supported, because they all support it, but it doesn't mean installed. The grepping for the VIB to be installed is actually how you validate it's actually installed correctly.
Okay, so it's just reporting it could support it, but not necessarily that it does at the moment.
Right.
Which is why we need to check the VAAI version. Okay.
Yeah, and one of the other things too is you'll see it called data mover in a lot of things. Did I list it here? No. I did it earlier this morning just to playing with some of the other commands on there. I'll just go look at my history, it's faster. Here. So this one, basically is called hardware accelerated moved, data mover kind of stuff. And value 1 basically means that. So, because you can go inside of vCenter and turn off VAAI, even though you've installed it, I can still turn it off. Well, this basically validates it's actually been enabled too, and it's called data mover inside of VMware. I don't know why they used the name of for data mover kind of process. It's always one of the fun things to do. Is like, hey, it doesn't seem to be working properly, and you go in and check the inside of the configuration, and this is set to 0, which is off or false, and that's why it's VAI is not working properly.
So when we install it, we enable this by default.
Yes.
Yes. So you shouldn't have to worry about this.
Yep. And the commands
under normal circumstances.
Yeah, and the commands for verifying that basically are in the install guide. So go ahead and make sure you read through that and follow it. It's a pretty decent guide. And again, this is one thing. This is one of the first things I install on an ESXi host, is because it does provide a massive performance boost for a lot of activities, because I don't want my ESXi host having to crank CPU and waste network when I can just leave it all at the storage array. Any more comments?
No, it's just the one.
All right.
So I think we're okay to move forward. Again, anybody who wants to throw any kind of Q&A in here, please do. We'll go back if we need to.
So now SyncVM, Steve, we're going to pass it over to you.
All right. So this is one of my favorite tools, not just to use, but also to demo, because it's very visually striking, and it's fun to demo it as well. So, and it's something that you can play with if you have a VMstore in your environment. Oh, so we have a poll as well. So, how many of you know about SyncVM? So I know we've done several of these sessions in the past around some of the specific features of SyncVM. But like I said, it's one of my favorite things to demo. So you may have seen this before, those of you who've been around for a while. So essentially what it does, there's a few different functions to it. One of which is the easiest to grok, if you will, is time travel for VMs. So instead of having to take an entire LUN or an entire volume and kind of pull it back in time and then extract the VM that you want, one of the unique things that we do with VMstore is we're able to do this on a per VM basis, right? So if you want to take one VM, move it back to a previous point in time, and we'll show you this in the demo here in a second, it's very, very easy to do. In fact, we can use the RBC plugin to accomplish that. So I'm going to be using that in the demo. And more importantly, you can actually go backwards and forwards in the snapshot chain. So you're not limited to going just backwards. You can actually go both directions, which has a lot of implications for workflows and other types of clever ways to use the state of those VMs in an interesting way. So we also have the ability to do very granular restores and refreshes. So we're not going to be covering refreshing today. That's kind of an esoteric topic. I would encourage you to go back and look at the refresh geek out that we did a while back. I think it's the one with the guy sipping the drink on the beach. I think that's the one. But if you look back on our website, you'll find it. That one's really interesting for databases and other types of workloads where you just need to restore one piece of the VM for a specific reason. So if you're going back and just recovering just the data and you want to keep the configs and the logs and all the same and they're all in different drives, being able to restore one disk at a time can have some really interesting ramifications for kind of cool workflows. So we talk about that in detail. Sorry, Shawn?
I do that a lot with databases wise. So
Right.
if I have a non-production database I need a copy of, I keep it only on one disk. I just replace that V disk, reboot, and now that database has been updated or changed to a known state I want it to be in.
Exactly. So it's very, very powerful.
Yeah.
But it's a very kind of specific use case that we coded to. So it's a little nuanced. So that's why we did a very specific geek out on that. We're not going to be showing that today. It takes a little time to set up and show why it works the way it does.
Yeah.
So the second function that I'll show you here in a second is file level recovery. We call it guest OS file. And that's the ability to do drag and drop restores of data that might have been deleted, removed, corrupted, things of that nature without using backup tools necessarily or third-party backup tools. You're able to do it directly from our UI. I'll show that too. It's very space efficient. It prefers customizations, and it's very different than the clone in that it maintains the existing UUID. So instead of having to clone something and create a new hardware ID, which may screw up activation or application-specific licensing, things of that nature, you can do recoveries without having to worry about those changing. So,
and the VMware UUID is how VMware differentiates it. So when you basically use a new UUID, VMware thinks it's a brand new VM. So all your history, your performance data will all be
right.
different. So if I want to maintain VMware history, I want to keep the UUID, which is why it's important to use SyncVM for recovery for that process and not just do a clone.
Correct. And I love the titles of this slide here is best kept secret in virtualization. I agree with that. This is a really cool tool. And the people that I show this to are like, kind of like what Lou said earlier, where's this been all my life? Right? Well, the good news is it's been here a long time. So, so if you don't mind, Shawn, let me share my screen.
All right. Well, let's do the poll results basically. Basically the same for
what were the poll results?
Yeah. Basically never heard of it, know of it, but haven't used it kind of stuff. It's about the same. It's, north of, 80% kind of stuff. So yes.
Okay. So the audience generally has not seen this before, which is again, why we did this. So
exactly.
I appreciate the fact that you guys are willing to share that with us. So let me share my screen here. So here is my version of vSphere, which is a different area than Shawn's. And what this shows is there's a couple of VMs that are kind of designed for this purpose. So the first one I'll show is the kind of the whole VM restoration process, the SyncVM restore. And I've got a VM here, and let me pop it up here. This is the one that I'm using for this purpose. So this is a server 2025. So essentially what I did is back in the COVID days, we were all sitting around and we didn't know what to do with ourselves because we were stuck at home. So I said, you know what? I'm going to create a VM And what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a series of milestones for that particular VM in its lifecycle. So in this case, it was an OS change. In different environments, this might be a version of an application. So if you're running a database application like an Oracle or a SQL Server, whatever it might be, this may be different versions of that application, and you want to set a milestone for each one of those. Now, doing this with VMware snapshots can be very problematic because you'd be going against their best practice of saying, hey, you shouldn't be leaving those around for a long period of time. There's a lot of performance ramifications to doing that. But in our case, there's no performance ramifications to keeping these snapshots around. So I created these snapshots, 5+ years ago in some cases. Actually, no, close to 5 years. But these, as you see here, they have labels on them as well. So for example, here, I've got one that says Windows XP server, I mean 2008R2, right? So this was created at the very beginning. And then what I did was I did what Windows tells you not to do, which is I essentially installed the new version in place on top of the old one. They'll always tell you, hey, you might want to do this a different way, create a new VM and then migrate the data. I get that. But in this case, what this kind of showcases is the ability to create these milestones in the life cycle of a particular workload, right? So what I'm going to do, and again, let me, I'll make the screen a little smaller. So what we'll do is we'll have this side by side here, and I'll have the task window here if I can get it. There we go. Oh, that's a little too big. Yeah, don't want to make it that big. All right. So what we're going to do is I'm going to use this tool to use the RVC plugin to restore this VM back to the state that it was in close to 5 years ago. So all I do in this case is go down my little Tintry window, and of course I made my screen just a little too small. So here's my Tintry screen here, our Tintry submenu. We're going to go synchronize. And what it's going to do is give me a list of the snapshots that are available that were on that previous screen. So in this case, the one that I created back then, which is labeled 2008R2, I'm going to pick that one, and then I'm going to restore it. Now, when I click restore, what's going to happen is one of the few kind of read-write functions that you give a VMstore when you integrate us into your environment is the ability to power on and power off specific VMs, right? So what we do in this case is we power off the VM. We then use a file system function to restore the VM to that previous state. And then we power the VM on. In fact, it took me longer to explain it than it did to actually happen, right? So within the course of about 10 seconds or so, that VM is now running 2008R2, right? And you can see that here in the corner. So this allows you to go back and restore that VM to any previous state, an arbitrary state, right? So of course it's going to complain about updates and all that kind of so forth. But so you'll notice here that this screen hasn't changed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to update the screen. So when I update the screen, again, this is using our plugin to do this. It's gathering the snapshot list from the VMstore to say what states are available for this particular VM. You'll notice there's a new one at the top. So the new one was created when I went back in time, and I call this the resume generating event insurance policy. So I got to laugh out of Shawn. So what that does is that makes sure that if you picked the wrong VM and you restored it to 5 years ago, you'd be able to recover from that very, very easily, right? Because let's say you meant to do this on some sort of development VM, and you picked production. Well, that can be a resume generating event. So if I want to go back forward, if that's a term, I want to go and pick that particular VM or that particular snapshot of that VM that we just created. I'm going to click restore, and it's essentially going to do the same thing in reverse. So now I'm going to go right back to where I began this process. And now that VM is going to be running server 2025, right?
So Steve, I
yes.
see you're running this inside of using the remote VCP client tool. You can do this as well from TGCs, right? Correct?
Yes. Yeah, so, I figured I'm going to layer the tools on top of each other today as part of this demo, right?
Right. So those of you who don't have the RVCP installed, you can still do this without having the client plugin installed.
Correct. Yes. Yeah, you can absolutely do that for sure. So now we're back to 2025. So what some customers have done is they've used a kind of a gold image or a state of a particular VM. And they, in some cases, they use this in cybersecurity, for example. We have several customers that use it in this way to create essentially what are honeypots, if you will. And those honeypots get attacked. And then there's data that's gathered from that attack. So intelligence is being gathered about how it's being attacked, why it's being attacked, and so forth. and then you want to reset it to a current state. So some of our customers have literally thousands of these, and it was taking them hours, if not days, to get this back into the previous state using the existing tools that are there in vSphere. Using this, they're able to do it in seconds. And in fact, they can do many, many at a time. I also had a customer recently that had a ransomware attack, and we're able to script this using PowerShell, which we'll talk about PowerShell, I think, a little bit later. And we're able to script this function and have it do multiple at a time. So in their case, it was multiple thousands of VMs to go back to a known good state before the breach. And instead of having to, spend hours or even weeks or months getting all of that data back, they were able to do it in a matter of hours. So it saved them a lot of money. We consider how many millions of dollars it could be per day in lost revenue, lost functionality, lost productivity. If you have a ransomware attack, being able to leverage tools like this to get you back where you should be and do it on a per VM basis. So you're not throwing babies out with bathwater, if you will, because some VMs may not have been touched, right? So being able to understand, which VMs are attacked and surgically attack just those and get them back is really, really good function. So, all right, so let's move on to the next feature, which we're going to talk about. Sorry, go ahead.
Question in the Q&A section basically. It says, what specific use cases or scenarios are VMstore tools most beneficial for in managing virtualized environments? And it basically, each tool has its built for its own purpose, for its own thing. And I think we've covered at least most of the use cases for those and what the reason for those would be. Obviously, SyncVM is going to be basically recovering basically of an individual workload. The vRCP is for basically doing all your management of VMs inside of vCenter itself instead of having to go into our product. And the VAAI basically is just leveraging the VMware tools to offload tasks to make it go faster. And we cover some of the other tools. We'll kind of mention the same thing too.
Yeah, so I'm just seeing the comments now because I had my own screen up, but it said, what kind of magic is this? I thought the same thing when I first saw this, right? But now the cool thing is I get to demo to people, which is kind of fun. So if you don't have this with your current environment and this would add value, definitely give us a call. We'd be happy to put a POC box in and you can prove this out in your own environment for sure. So.
Yeah, and the other thing that's
anything else from the chat we should deal with first? No.
I think it's just the ransomware process. I mean, just the ability to recover is fantastic with the VMstore. And with our new snapshot locking feature we've added too, makes snapshots easy to recover from since it's per VM snapshots, and the ability to do things like that is just amazingly fantastic.
Yes. Right. So I believe we have a Geek out on our website that deals with that issue specifically. So yeah. Cool. I think you did that, as a matter of fact. Did you not?
Yes, I did.
Yes, you did. So if you want to see Shawn again, go back to our website and go find the snapshot lock one. That was a fun one. Okay. So one of the other things you can do with that same toolkit is the ability to do drag and drop restore of files within a VM itself. So we don't want to necessarily take the whole VM back in time. But if we have some sort of event on a specific VM, and I've got a VM here that I'm using, I've got a secondary disk called the T drive, the Tintry drive, right? And I've got some critical data on here. I basically just threw some data in. It doesn't really matter what it is. It doesn't matter how big it is, right? But this is just an example. So if I go in here and I delete this data, and then I want to really delete it. So I want to go in and empty the recycle bin. So that data is not recoverable, right? So that data is gone. So what are the options that I have to go get that data back? Well, I could restore the whole VM if I had a snapshot that was that it contained that data, and that's great. But if I have backup software installed, I can go through that whole process, pull the data back. That's great too. That could take some time, right? But one of the other things that you might be able to do is allow your users or the administrators, you can lock down or not lock down this feature any way you like. You can go in and say, I want to essentially expose the disks from a snapshot from that same VM back into the live VM. Okay, so what that means is there's going to be additional devices that get attached to that VM, and that's what this guest OS file thing is here. So I'm going to take this, and I created a snapshot called critical data present, right? So before I did the delete within the live VM, I created a snapshot of this VM with that data present. So if I pick that particular VM, you'll notice here there's a button that says auto detach. So generally, if you don't want to forget that these are attached, you'd leave that box checked. And that way, if you haven't done the restore in 48 hours, you just do it again. But this will get rid of it and clean itself up automatically in 48 hours. So nice little feature. So when I click restore here, what this is going to do, and I've got my disk management here, you will notice that 2 additional devices just showed up in disk management. So this is the boot drive here, and this is the T drive or the data drive. So if I need to online the drive, right? And I need to assign it a disk letter as well. So let's change the drive letter. So let's say, we'll call it the E drive, right? So now if I go to my E drive, you'll notice that there is critical data in the E drive. So essentially this is mounting read-write the snapshot data from that initial snapshot that I created where the data was present. And then I can just simply copy that data back to my T drive and paste it. And now I have recovered that data myself. So instead of having to go in and get management involved or, create a ticket, whatever it may be, if somebody just created maybe they made a mistake, they deleted some data, instead of getting all that process involved, they can do this themselves. So it's self-service recovery at that level. And then as mentioned here, it'll automatically detach within 40 hours. But if you're already done, there's another function within that same tool here called synchronize here, and it says detach virtual disks. So if I pick that function and I click OK here, you'll notice that those drives went away, right? So very, very simple, very, very clean. And it allows you to go in and allow your users or administrators, depending on how we want to lock it down, to go in and do self-service recovery. So.
Yeah, and there are a lot of other tools that do the same thing. It's just they're much slower and or much more cumbersome, and you're having to log into 2 or 3 other different applications and that kind of stuff. There's a lot more steps.
Yeah, and I've seen other solutions where it'll create a clone of the VM. Well, okay, that's great. If you create a clone of the VM, how do you get the data from one to the other?
Right.
Right? So doing
Exactly.
drag and drop restores are not real easy in that scenario. But in this case, because you're actually mounting the real data in the live VM, it becomes a piece of cake, right?
Yeah.
And really the only thing you need to do is online the drives and you're good to go.
Right. Like a lot of times you can mount it up in in your backup storage. But the problem is it's if I'm recovering a fair amount of data, that backup storage tends to be really slow. And so yeah, it
Yes.
does take a long time. And or I'm using more storage space. It's not storage efficient.
So I did want to mention just real quick. So there, that other function that we talked about, the refresh function, right? So we're not going to cover in detail here and we won't do a live demo of it. But what this allows you to do though is restore a disk that we just did from a different VM, right? So for example, if we wanted to take the contents of a production VM and make it available on a QA VM, for example, this is the way you would do it. So you would pick a different VM in this case. I'll just pick a random VM. And pick a snapshot from it. And you can say, hey, I don't want to change my boot drive, but I want to change this drive, right? So you can pick and choose which data gets changed. Now, this does require a reboot because we're essentially pulling drives out and putting them in. And SCSI doesn't really like that in live VMs, right? So we have to make sure that we do it in a clean way. So we'll do a reboot here. But one of the interesting things that we talk about it in the geek out that we did on this topic is what if you could refresh the data in all of your QA environment from production on a regular basis and to have those ready to go for developers so they're always developing against the latest version of the database, right? So again, it's kind of an esoteric use case, but for those people who do this kind of stuff and having things that are very recent and relevant is important. Having tools like this that don't require any data movement to update can be really, really cool and can be very efficient. So we won't demo that today, but go back and look at the one that we did in the past. All right, so back to you, Shawn. We got more tools to cover here.
All right. We're trying to help you build your own toolbox. All right, back to slideware, our favorite part of demonstrations. Sorry. Actually, we didn't finish all the slides for SyncVM to disaster recovery. I think you covered them all in your demo process.
Yeah, I kind of went ahead and covered them. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Yeah, one of my favorite ones a lot of times too is like we talk about isolated test environments.
Right.
With SyncVM cloning and this kind of stuff, we can do some things, especially when all of us have requirements for security testing. Like if I need to do an IDS, intrusion detection testing, whatever, or pen testing kind of stuff, penetration testing, I can quickly with a VMstore go build an isolated environment of all those VMs somewhere else, and then I give those testers full access because it's an identical 100% copy of production, and they can go nuts in there and not impact anybody else. That way, I know, my penetration testing is actually A, not impactful production, and B, actually tested against production. And that's one of the amazing things I do love.
So Alyssa apparently is one of the people who's never seen this before, and Alyssa says that is life changing. The ability to being able to pull up previous versions of data and then dig through to see what somebody might have deleted, for example.
Yeah.
So it could be used as forensics for maybe internal
Mhm.
sabotage, right? There could be a lot of things that could go into that.
Oh
So
yeah,
great point. Yep.
it's a fantastic tool, and okay. Snapshots are not backups. Granted, we have many customers who use our snapshots as their primary backup process. It's not a backup. It is just a snapshot. It's a point in time process. But the fact I can speed up and recover things so much quicker. When I talk about using SyncVM for things on recovery wise, I think more time we'll spend in the meeting with the 5 admins trying to figure out the best way to do it. What's the best way to recover the damaged data versus actually recovering the data. Um, you know, your decision points is actually discussion, not actually doing the work. All right, SRM. I'm just going to cover this basically. If you run SRM, which is Site Recovery Manager from VMware, the SRA tool is very, very important for you to have installed because it does allow all the replication processes to work properly, which, hey, it's still auto forwarding. Basically manages the failover, the failback, how it can test recovery because with SRM you can fail over, test it, and then basically just destroy it. You can do a faux test, kind of process the verify, and then you reprotect. So in other words, if you happen to do a failover, the reprotection basically is the copying the data back to make sure that the source location is actually in sync with the destination kind of process. Again, that the major one. Reason why I covered this one on this deck here is we had a new release of it recently, and now we're going to kind of go through some of the other integration points and other things that we have, because as IT admins, we all have toolboxes, and we want to fill them as many tools as possible, and find the right tool for the job as you need to. Like my wife and I had a discussion. I moved not that long ago, and she's like, "Why do you have like 9 types of saws?" I'm like, "I've got 14 types of saws because I have the right tool for the right job. And the VMstore is that. I've got my skill saws, I've coping saws, I've got regular table saw. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. I have the right tool. So with us as IT admins, we do a lot of different tasks, and I want to make sure you have the tools you need to do your jobs properly, kind of stuff. So some of the other integration points that we have, we saw everything here has been kind of VMware focused, but we do basically have some tools for Hyper-V as well. So we can run Hyper-V as a hypervisor, and we have tools to make some of the things with Hyper-V work well. We do support Zen Server or Citrix Hypervisor. They keep changing names like every 18 months. I'm not sure why, but Zen has been doing that for decades now. We just have to get used to it. A while ago, we launched our CSI, or our container storage interface, that allows you to run, basically manage persistent volumes for a containerized environment. Right now, maybe many of you are not probably needing that, but you're going to see, as you said, we talked about the RVCP is a container. Applications are starting to be deployed from vendors as containers, and we'll need to, as admins, manage those. And the VMstore with our CSI driver process allows you to do everything you saw for VM kind of stuff work now at a persistent volume in the container space level. We do
Yeah, I
have,
kind of wish we had a poll on that because we're starting to see
yeah,
that ISVs are starting to ship things in containers, but I'm curious about the uptake.
yeah,
So put it in the chat if you're getting, I don't want to say pressure is the right word, but if you're integrated or independent software vendors, your ISVs are coming out with versions of applications that you use and they're delivering it in a container format, I would love to know that.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
Gartner, I think, had a paper out a while ago, basically saying they think 2025 is the year of the container. And what they mean by that was they expect to see, that's when people are actually not just development shops use it. It's now day-to-day IT is going to be running containers, because the applications they have, what we always called COTS, custom off-the-shelf applications that we run as VMs, are now going to show up as containers, or we're not going to run as containers, and we're going to have to be able to scale and manage and maintain all those. And we're going to see, it's just starting to hit today. You'll see a few things, but I expect to see more and more and more as time progresses. And having us to be able to provide what we do per VM to do per your persistent volume in the container space is going to be, mind blowing for people who don't have to do that kind of process. It's to make the learning process, the troubleshooting, the management much easier. Red Hat, we still have Red Hat virtualization integrations, and we have a tool called SQL integrated storage. So we can do all those cloning, those snapshot processes, all those cool things like that, but at a SQL Server database level. So if you do SQL Server development work, it is fantastic. And pretty soon we're going to be launching OpenStack support with our Cinder driver. So that way, if you're using Platform 9 type tools or management systems with OpenStack, we'll be able to support you from that as well.
And I'd remind everybody that Shawn just did a SQL integrated storage geek out not that long ago. So
Yeah,
again,
it's
if you
been a
want to
while.
double click on that topic, we've got one available on the website.
Yeah, we did one on containers too not that long ago, but yeah, we do a lot of these different ones.
Yeah, last month was the container one, which was
Yep.
a lot of fun to do. Yes.
Yeah. So other tool space we have out there. So if you're running in the VMware space, we have ARIA operations and our ARIA automation on our website. Whoops. On our website, we still list the old names because Broadcom renamed them to ARIA instead of before they were vRealize. So we've got both names up there. Tentry Automation Toolkit. This is basically PowerShell, a bunch of commandlets for you to go run, so you can do everything. I did a geek out about how to use PowerShell to do 4 or 5 different admin tasks that you can now automate and script kind of process. Tingle. Tingle is one of the coolest tools we have. Was actually Steve and I were talking about this. We launched it in 2013. It's an IO load generator that's very, very customizable. So when I'm actually looking at my systems, I actually can do different things in there. I will scale IO loads if I want to show QoS and how QoS works. I'll go create a workload that's really high end, and then turn QoS on and watch that workload drop down kind of process. I use it for basically load testing, different things. So it's a fantastic tool. And then sync REPL with or without automatic failover, which is allow us to actually have a VM and have it copied, or basically a managed object, and have it copied over somewhere else and running all the time, but in synchronously, which of course, you just got to make sure now you have 2 copies of basically.
So we had a question. Is there documentation on Tingle? I believe there is on the support site. If there's not, reach out to us and we'll kind of walk you through how it works and all that good stuff. But there should be a small amount of documentation out there.
Yeah.
So
no, I thought I had it. I was up on over here where I brought it up. And support portal, again, all these things are in here. Where Tingle exists. Tentry utility.
Yes, in the utility section, way at the bottom.
Yeah, at the bottom. Yep. So you got to scroll down a ways to get down to Tentry utilities. This is also where Visio stencils are at too. But you'll find the Tingle, the image, and there is no.
I don't see any documentation there. So if you need help running it, reach out to one of us.
Yeah,
we'd be happy to help
you through the kind of process.
Yeah, it's really straightforward.
But the SRM, processes here. The PowerShell toolkit is up in here. This is the plugin we talked about. vRealize for operations. Again, you can download them all from here. Here's the automation toolkit on there. It talks about the different commandlets. The release notes. We also do have a GitHub for some of the stuff, for some sample documentation. The process talks about the quick start guide, but there's a lot more inside of the GitHub on different things, so you can get started with different things. But yeah, so again, downloads and scroll around here, and it's all here. And if you can't find something, feel free to reach out to your sales support team.
Yeah, in fact, Efreen just reached out and said, how do we get a hold of you? So I'm S. Phillips at Tentry. So first initial, last name, Phillips at Tentry. Happy to answer the question on the Tingle stuff. So we have a couple minutes left here. So there was one question here that doesn't necessarily have to do with tools, but Paul asked, how does our analytics help organizations optimize cloud storage costs while maintaining high performance AI workloads, but efficiency at a lower cost? I would say that goes into kind of the basic value proposition of our product, right? Being able to have all of our telemetry and all that kind of stuff for on-prem types of installations, whether you're running an AI workload or not, whether you're running a GPU-based workload or not, that really doesn't matter. It's all about having the basic premise of our product. If you go back and watch the brief history of time, I've been pimping geek outs all day today. It's kind of fun. We talk a lot about the core values of why we do what we do and why it's important to leverage them for any kind of on-prem workload. So what we found is that as people are bringing back workloads into the cloud or from the cloud in some cases, they were able to leverage those core functions of the product. Our analytics tool kind of takes all that telemetry and puts it all in one place. So you can see individual VMs, what they're doing over time, groups of VMs. I mean, there's a lot of things that we do there. We probably don't have time to talk about that in detail, but I did want to address that question. So we are at the top of the hour. Shawn, any closing comments? I think we covered all the tools, right?
I think we got through all of it, just barely, and again, our goal with all these things is basically make, the admin's life easier. I mean, the VMstore already solves so many problems for you, but we still want to make it even easier to make your so you can go focus on management's biggest problems, not managing different simple things like, storage.
Right. Cool.
Steve,
So
we've
if you don't
got
mind,
one
put up the
more
last
question
slide. Oh, we got
in
one
the
more
chat.
question. Do we need a support account? Yes. So if you need to get to the Tingle stuff, you need a support account. You can get a support account as long as you have a serial number of a supported box. So it's real simple to do. So here's the next session. So May, we're going to do our kind of non-technical geek out session. And this is our cookouts. These are extremely popular. And as you can see there, there was one of my favorite albums from back when I was in college. I'm dating myself, unfortunately. Was a Red Hot Chili Peppers album called Blood Sugar Sex Magic, and they did Brat Sizzle Steak Magic. So it's going to be myself. Shawn, the automatic slide thing is going. So myself and Scott Thomas. So if you haven't seen one of these before, we have way too much fun doing these. There's a little bit of technical content. But for the most part, we just have fun doing some cookouts with Scott Thomas, who is an absolutely brilliant grillist. I don't know if that's the right word, but we have a lot of fun. So tune in for that. It's going to be May 21st. I'm actually going to be in the studio. I'm going to be on site in St. Louis with Scott. So like I said, if you haven't seen these before, we have way too much fun doing them. Definitely go back on the website and see some of the previous ones we've done. But this one is going to be super fun. So that's going to be May 21st at noon Central. So I'm in Central Time. So it'll be noon Central on May 21st. So look forward to that. Again, if you're watching this live, make sure you watch your spam folder in your inbox. So if we picked you for the Switch, keep an eye out for that. And getting some great comments in the chat. So yes, you're welcome. We had fun doing this, right, Shawn? We always have fun.
We always have fun doing this.
Exactly.
And I love the participation. Great questions.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I call this the smartest audience on the web, and I'm never disappointed. So we'll see most of you on May 21st. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time. Thanks, everyone.